The rain fell like a metronome, tapping the windowsill of my old house, each drop a reminder of time's relentless march. My tea had gone cold, forgotten, as I stared into the gray October sky where clouds churned like secrets waiting to spill. My name is Eunice Grimshaw, 78 years old, a widow for 15. Sometimes it feels I've lived not one life, but many, each fading into the next, until I landed here, in this quiet, unnoticed existence. This house, a creaking Victorian relic in Cumberland, is my anchor, its walls holding memories of laughter, love, and loss. Once, it echoed with my son Gavin's childish giggles, chasing fireflies in the garden, my husband Alfred's steady voice, calling us to dinner, the crackle of the radio on Sunday mornings, filling the air with jazz. Now it's just me, the clock, and the ghosts of what was. I rose, my cane tapping the worn floorboards, my knees aching with the promise of more rain. As I passed the mantelpiece, I paused at a photograph, its wooden frame smoothed by years of touch. Alfred, on our wedding day, stood stiff in his suit, his hair combed back, a shy smile softening his serious face. He was an engineer, a man of deeds, not words. Not with words, but with deeds, he'd say, fixing a chair or building a life for us. I traced the dusty glass with my finger, my voice a whisper. What would you say, Alfred? What would you say about our son now? This house holds my secrets, my regrets, my hopes. It's seen me love fiercely, lose deeply, and linger in the aftermath. Today, something stirs, a feeling I can't name, like the first gust before a tempest. I thought I knew my son, my Gavin, but the man he's become is a stranger. His heart a locked door I no longer hold the key to, yet I cling to the belief that love can mend what time has torn. This is my story, a tale of sacrifice and betrayal, of shadows cast by those I trusted most, and of a strength I didn't know I possessed. It begins here, in the quiet before the storm, where the past whispers and the future waits, watching. Gavin was our miracle, born 2 years after Alfred and I stood under a summer sky, vowing forever. He was our everything, our dreams, our savings, our heart. A bright boy, polite with his father's knack for fixing things, he'd build towers of blocks, his tongue poking out in concentration, dreaming of becoming an engineer like Alfred. I can still hear Alfred's laugh, ruffling Gavin's hair, saying, "He's got your stubbornness, Eunice." We spoiled him, not with toys or treats, but with love, with time, with the belief he'd carry our hopes into the future. This house was alive then, its walls ringing with his laughter, our footsteps, the clink of dishes at dinner. Then came the shadow, lung cancer, swift and merciless. Alfred fought, but it stole him in months, leaving a void that swallowed the warmth of this house. Gavin was 37, married to Laura, a sweet woman with a gentle laugh, working in insurance. Their son Keith, a bright-eyed boy of 10. I thought grief would bind us, a shared wound to heal together. But at Alfred's funeral, as I stood by the grave, tears streaming, Gavin was distant. He stood apart, tall and thin, his father's features but not his heart, his eyes fixed on some far-off point, as if the earth-claiming Alfred meant nothing to him. I reached for him, my hand trembling, but he turned away, his silence louder than my sobs. That evening, in this house, now too big for one, I asked, "Gavin, are you all right?" My voice was soft, pleading for connection. His reply was sharp, a blade wrapped in indifference. "Mom, I'm 40. I'm not a child. You can't cling to the past." The words cut deeper than I admitted, the first crack in a bond I thought unbreakable. I told myself it was grief, not him, but the truth lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. 3 years later, he divorced Laura. She was naive, perhaps, but she loved him fiercely, and Keith was their light. Gavin said they'd grown apart, offering no details, and I didn't press. I'd learned not to ask too much, not to expect too much. Gavin changed after the divorce. His calls dwindled to once a month, his visits to brief, distracted stops. He'd sit in my living room, eyes glued to his phone, talking of promotions, bonuses, a new car, never of us, never of the past. His life was a whirlwind of ambition, and I was a footnote, a relic he acknowledged only when he needed something. Once, over tea, I tried to bridge the gap. "Gavin, honey, we've become strangers," I said, my voice trembling. He looked up, puzzled, then sighed, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "I've got a life, Mom. I can't sit here talking about the neighbors or your TV shows." His words hit harder than a slap, but I said nothing. What could I say? That I'd worked 35 years as a nurse, sacrificing sleep and dreams to give him everything. That I'd sold my jewelry to pay for his college, skipped vacations to fund his future? That when Alfred was sick, I drained our savings for the best doctors, leaving myself with nothing but this house and my love for him. A mother doesn't keep a ledger of love, but oh, how I wished he'd seen it. Keith was my salvation, the light that kept the darkness at bay. Unlike his father, he came often, first with Laura, then alone as he grew older. He'd weed the garden, his hands quick and sure, listen to my stories of Alfred, bring me books from the library. "Grandma, you've got to keep up with the times," he'd say, grinning as he showed me how to video call or shop online. He even convinced me to start a gardening blog, a quiet corner of the internet where I wrote about my roses, their petals a canvas for my thoughts. A few dozen subscribers, mostly women my age, found solace in my words, and I in theirs. Keith went to college in a nearby town, studying biology, his calls filled with stories of classes, girlfriends, dreams of discovery. In him, I saw sincerity, kindness, the son Gavin once was, before the world hardened him. Last spring, Keith called with news that stopped my heart. "Grandma, Dad's getting married." His voice was cautious, as if testing the waters. Jenny, a woman from his dental office, had swept into his life, their romance hidden until now. "Is she good to him?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the phone, a prickle of unease stirring. Keith hesitated, a pause heavy with meaning. "She's normal, a bit bossy, sugar-sweet with Dad, but different with others, like she's playing a part." His words planted a seed of doubt, a whisper of something amiss. But I pushed it down, telling myself if Gavin was happy, I could learn to love her for his sake. Yet deep down, I felt it, a shadow moving closer, a storm gathering on the horizon. Spring had come to Cumberland, breathing life into my garden, where roses unfurled like promises under the April sun. I stood in my living room, the scent of blooms drifting through the open window, when the phone rang, shattering the morning's quiet. Gavin's name flashed on the screen, and my heart lifted, foolishly hoping for a moment of connection. His voice, when I answered, was bright but brittle, the way it got when he wanted something, a tone I'd come to recognize like a storm on the horizon. "Mom, I'm getting married," he announced, as if Keith hadn't already broken the news. "To Jenny. You'll love her. She's smart, caring, a real hostess." His words were rehearsed, a salesman's pitch, and I braced myself for what came next. A pause, heavy with expectation. Then the number, a sum so staggering I nearly dropped the phone. 3 times what I'd imagined, enough to drain the savings I'd built over decades as a nurse, working night shifts, skipping vacations, selling my mother's jewelry to give Gavin a life Alfred and I dreamed for him. Hilltop Manor, Cumberland's crown jewel, with its sweeping lawns and lake views, was their choice. 100 guests, live music, a fairy tale wedding that screamed extravagance. "We want it to be perfect," Gavin said, his voice softening, almost pleading. "Jenny deserves the best, Mom. You'll help, won't you?" I heard the boy in him, the one who'd once run to me with scraped knees, and my heart betrayed my head. "Of course, Gavin," I said, my voice steady despite the ache. I said yes because he was my son, because I believed this might mend the distance between us, because I couldn't bear to say no. But as I hung up, a chill settled in my bones, a whisper that this wedding wasn't about love. It was about something else, something I couldn't yet name. I wrote the first check that morning, my pen heavy, each stroke a surrender of the future I'd saved for. I told myself it was for Gavin's happiness, that this grand gesture would bring him back to me, the son who'd once drawn me pictures of roses and promised to build me a greenhouse one day. But the truth was sharper, colder. A mother's love is a currency easily spent, and I was spending it on a hope that felt increasingly fragile. A week later, Gavin brought Jenny to meet me, a moment I'd both anticipated and dreaded since Keith's cautious warning. "She's different with others," he'd said, his voice tight, and I'd brushed it aside, wanting to believe in Gavin's choice. Jenny stepped into my home like a queen surveying a modest court, her heels clicking on the hardwood, her perfume sharp and expensive. "What a charming house," she said, her voice syrupy, her eyes lingering on my mother's silver tea set, the antique clock, the faded Persian rug Alfred and I bought for our 10th anniversary. "These must be worth something," she added, her smile tight, as if calculating their value in her head. I nodded, uneasy, offering tea as we sat. Gavin beamed, his arm around her, but her gaze was cold, assessing as if I were a piece of furniture to be catalogued. They talked of the wedding, her designer dress from a boutique in London, peonies over roses because roses are so predictable, a menu with lobster and filet mignon, a string quartet for the ceremony. I listened, an outsider in my own story, my role reduced to nodding, smiling, agreeing. I offered to help with planning, perhaps choosing flowers or organizing the guest book, small ways to be part of Gavin's day. Jenny waved me off, her smile sharp as glass. "At your age, Eunice, it's better to rest," she said, her tone patronizing, her mispronunciation of my name a deliberate slight. "We've got this under control. You wouldn't want to strain yourself." I wasn't infirm. My cane was for arthritis, not fragility. But I held my tongue, hoping she'd warm to me, hoping this was just nerves, not malice. But her eyes, cold and calculating, told a different story. She wasn't here to know me. She was here to claim what I could give. Gavin said nothing, his silence a betrayal louder than words. As they left, Jenny's parting hug was stiff, her whisper, "Thanks for the help," laced with something I couldn't name, a shadow that followed me long after their car disappeared down the street. Hilltop Manor was a world apart from my modest home, its Georgian columns and crystal chandeliers, a testament to wealth and ambition. The lake stretched beyond, its surface calm but hiding depths I couldn't see. Miss Potter, the wedding planner, walked me through their vision, a terrace ceremony framed by lavender and silver, cocktails in the garden with fairy lights, dinner in a chandelier-lit hall with silk tablecloths and gold-rimmed plates. The cost was staggering, each detail a drain on my savings. But I nodded, clutching my purse, telling myself it was for Gavin. I suggested white roses, Alfred's favorite, a small nod to the man who'd made this family possible. Jenny's look was sharp, almost mocking. "We're leaning toward peonies," she said, her voice final. "Roses are so common." Gavin nodded, his eyes on her, not me, as if my suggestion was a nuisance. The guest list was another shock. 115, 15 more than the 100 we'd agreed on, each name an added expense I hadn't approved. "Jenny's family is large," Gavin explained, his tone dismissive, as if my concern was petty. I suggested affordable champagne, a practical choice to ease the strain on my savings. Jenny sneered, her laugh sharp as a blade. "Laurent? Really? Eunice? This isn't a backyard barbecue." Miss Potter glanced at me, her eyes sympathetic but fleeting as she scribbled notes. The seating plan was the final blow. They'd placed me at a corner table, far from Gavin and Jenny, with strangers, distant cousins and office acquaintances I'd never met. "Symmetry matters for photographs," Jenny said, her voice cold, her eyes avoiding mine. "It's about the aesthetic." I was funding their dream, yet I was an afterthought, a guest they barely tolerated, my role reduced to a checkbook they expected to open without question. Back home, Jenny's demands came daily, each a new twist of the knife. She called, texted, emailed, her tone shifting from sweet to sharp, depending on her mood. My dress, a modest blue I'd worn to a friend's wedding, didn't fit her color scheme. "Silver or very light lavender," she insisted, "and nothing old-fashioned. No collars, no brooches, no pearls." I complied, driving to a boutique in town, spending hours choosing a silver-gray dress, elegant and age-appropriate, hoping it would please her. I sent a photo, my heart foolishly hopeful. "It looks like funeral clothes," she texted back, her words a slap across the miles. I tried again, scouring stores for a lavender dress, modest yet stylish, with long sleeves and a stand-up collar. I sent another photo, bracing myself. "Like an elderly nun's," she replied, her cruelty cutting deeper each time, her words a weapon wielded with precision. Keith called one evening, his voice tight with anger, a rare crack in his calm demeanor. "She's manipulative, Grandma," he warned. His words rushed, as if he'd been holding them back too long. "Jenny's spinning Dad like a top. She wants control, not just your money. She's using him and he's too blind to see it." I listened, my heart sinking, his words echoing the unease I'd tried to ignore. "Be careful," he said. "She's not who she seems." I smiled through the phone, reassuring him, but the truth gnawed at me, a shadow growing darker with each demand, each dismissal. I was a pawn in their game, my love for Gavin a leash they tugged without remorse. And yet, I kept giving, kept hoping, kept believing that my sacrifices would bring him back to me. The wedding day dawned bright, the sky a perfect blue, as if mocking the storm brewing in my heart. I arrived 2 hours early, against Gavin's wishes, hoping to feel part of his day, to be more than the checkbook they'd reduced me to. Hilltop Manor buzzed with preparations, florists arranging peonies in precise rows, workers stringing fairy lights across the garden, delivery vans humming in the driveway. Miss Potter, surprised to see me, greeted me with a polite smile, her clipboard clutched tightly. "You're early, Mrs. Grimshaw," she said, her tone kind but firm. "Why don't you rest in the library until we're ready?" She escorted me to a grand room with bookcases to the ceiling, armchairs by a window overlooking the lake. "Rest here," she said, her eyes flicking to her watch, a gentle dismissal that stung more than it should. I sat alone, my tea growing cold, watching from the window as the world I'd paid for took shape without me. A young waitress, her apron crisp, slipped into the room to refill my cup. She glanced around, then whispered, her voice low. "She's been a nightmare, you know. Miss Jenny?" Threw a fit over the frosting shade. Too ivory, not cream. Had the tablecloths rearranged twice. She paused, her eyes meeting mine, a flicker of pity in them. "You're paying for all this, aren't you?" I nodded, my throat tight, unable to speak. She slipped away, leaving me with the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't my son's wedding. It was Jenny's stage, her performance, her triumph, and I was an unwanted extra. My role reduced to a signature on a check, my presence a nuisance to be managed. The ceremony was flawless, a scripted fairy tale played out under a perfect sky. Gavin's vows were earnest, his voice steady, and I wanted to believe in his happiness, to see the boy I'd raised in the man before me. Jenny's smile was dazzling, her eyes bright with something more than love. Triumph, perhaps, or control. I sat in the front row, my lavender dress carefully chosen, my pearl brooch a quiet rebellion against her rules. I wiped a tear as they kissed, hoping this moment would be the bridge I'd dreamed of, the one to bring Gavin back to me. But as the guests moved to the garden for cocktails, I felt it again. That invisibility, that weight of being unwanted in a world I'd paid for. I wandered to the terrace, seeking air, seeking escape, not knowing the storm was about to break. The library at Hilltop Manor was a world apart from the wedding outside, its bookcases towering like silent sentinels, its armchairs a refuge I hadn't chosen. My tea sat cold on the table, untouched, as I watched the preparations I'd paid for unfold without me. Florists adjusted peonies with surgical precision. Workers strung fairy lights that twinkled like stars, and a harpist tuned her instrument, each note floating through the open window. Miss Potter, the wedding planner, had escorted me here an hour ago, her polite smile a gentle dismissal. "Rest, Mrs. Grimshaw," she'd said, her eyes flicking to her watch, as if my presence was a complication to be managed. I wasn't infirm, not broken, but I felt invisible, a ghost haunting a celebration I'd funded with my life's savings. The weight of it pressed against my chest, the cost, the distance, the hope I'd clung to that this day would bring Gavin back to me. I'd fought for a seat in the front row, a small victory after begging Miss Potter to adjust the seating plan. Jenny had wanted me at a corner table, far from the aisle, far from Gavin, with strangers whose names I didn't know. "Symmetry matters for photographs," she'd said, her voice cold, her eyes avoiding mine. But I'd insisted, my voice firm for the first time in months, and Miss Potter relented, her nod reluctant but final. Now, as I took my place, the terrace was a vision of lavender and silver, the peonies framing the arch like a painting. Gavin stood tall, his bespoke suit a testament to the fortune I'd spent, his smile tense but handsome, his eyes fixed on the aisle where Jenny would appear. I wanted to see the boy I'd raised in him, the one who'd drawn me pictures of roses, who'd promised to build me a greenhouse someday. I wanted to believe in his happiness, to believe this wedding was worth the cost, not just of money, but of the pieces of myself I'd given away. Jenny glided down the aisle, her gown a cascade of silk and crystals, her face glowing with something more than love. Triumph, perhaps, or control. The guests murmured, their admiration a chorus. But I watched Gavin, searching for the son I knew. His vows were earnest, his voice steady, promising to cherish her, to build a life together. I wiped a tear, clinging to the hope that this moment would be the bridge I'd dreamed of, the one to mend the rift between us. Jenny's vows were polished, her words sweet but rehearsed, like lines from a script she'd memorized. As they kissed, the guests clapped, the harp swelled, and I told myself this was enough. that my sacrifices, my savings, my silence had bought this moment of joy for my son. But deep down, a whisper stirred, a shadow I couldn't ignore. This wasn't my son's wedding. It was Jenny's stage, and I was a prop, tolerated but unwanted. The cocktail hour began, the garden alive with laughter and clinking glasses. I wandered to the terrace, seeking air, seeking escape from the weight of my invisibility. Guests mingled, their voices a distant hum, their faces unfamiliar. Jenny's cousins, Gavin's coworkers, people I'd never met but whose plates and drinks I'd paid for. I stood by the railing, the lake stretching before me, its surface calm but hiding depths I couldn't fathom. Gavin and Jenny posed for photos near the floral arch, her smile dazzling, his strained as if he sensed the storm I felt brewing. I clutched my shawl, my pearl brooch a small anchor, reminding me of who I was. A mother, a widow, a woman who'd given everything. But here I was nothing, a stranger at my own expense, my role reduced to a checkbook they expected to open without question. Then she found me, her heels clicking like a predator's approach, her ivory gown glowing in the fading light. Jenny's face was a mask of rage, her eyes narrowed, her voice thick with champagne and venom. "You've ruined my wedding," she spat, her words slicing through the hum of the crowd. I froze, my heart pounding, as guests turned, their whispers spreading like wildfire. "You showed up early, poking your nose into my preparations, trying to steal the spotlight," she accused, her voice rising, drawing every eye on the terrace. "Gavin told me how you controlled him, smothered him with your care, always manipulating with your money. You're jealous, aren't you? Jealous of me, of our happiness." Her words hit like blows, each one a knife to my heart. I stood there, stunned, the terrace spinning around me, the lake blurring in my vision. Jealous? Controlling? I'd given everything, my savings, my dreams, my silence, for Gavin's happiness, and this was my reward? I looked to my son, who appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of frustration. Not love, his suit rumpled as if he'd been pacing. "Gavin," I whispered, my voice trembling, barely audible over Jenny's accusations. "Do you believe this?" I searched his eyes for the boy I'd raised, the one who'd clung to me when Alfred died, who'd promised to never let me go. But his gaze slid away, his jaw tight, his silence louder than her screams. "Maybe you should go, Mom," he said finally, his voice flat, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Jenny's upset. It's her day." That moment, the silence of my son, the weight of his choice, snapped something inside me. The thread that tied me to Gavin, woven through years of sacrifice, broke with an almost audible crack. I'd spent decades giving, my time, my money, my heart, believing it would keep him close, believing it would make him love me as I loved him. But now, standing on that terrace, with Jenny's venom ringing in my ears and Gavin's betrayal cutting deeper than any blade, I saw the truth. I wasn't their mother, their family. I was their bank, their doormat, their ghost, tolerated only for what I could give. The realization was a cold fire, burning away the illusions I'd clung to, leaving only clarity in its wake. I turned to leave, my cane tapping the stone terrace, each step a declaration I hadn't known I could make. Keith pushed through the crowd, his face pale, his eyes wide with worry. "Grandma, don't go," he said, his voice breaking. "This isn't right." I touched his cheek, my heart aching for him, the one light in this darkness. "This isn't your fight, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I'll be okay." He shook his head, his jaw tight, but I smiled, a small, sad smile, and walked on. The guests parted. their whispers a chorus of judgment, their eyes burning my back. I didn't look at Gavin again, didn't give Jenny the satisfaction of seeing my pain. I walked to the exit, the Manor's lights glowing behind me, a glittering reminder of a dream I'd paid for but wasn't part of. As the cab pulled away, Hilltop Manor's glow faded into the Cumberland night, its beauty a lie I'd believed too long. I cried, silent tears for the son I'd lost, for the love I'd poured into a void. But with each mile, the tears dried, and something else took their place, a clarity, sharp and cold as the night air. I was done being their bank, their doormat, their ghost. I'd given everything, but no more. The storm had broken, and in its wreckage, I saw myself for the first time, not just a mother, a widow, but a woman with a life still to live. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something I hadn't dared imagine, a reckoning, a reclaiming, a rebirth. Morning broke over Cumberland, the sunlight pale and sharp, cutting through the curtains like a blade through my haze of grief. I sat at the kitchen table, the house quieter than it had ever been, the echoes of last night's betrayal still ringing in my ears. The family photo, me, Alfred, and Gavin, laughing on a picnic 20 years ago, lay shattered on the living room floor, its glass scattered like the pieces of my heart. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't moved since the cab dropped me off from Hilltop Manor, its glittering lights fading into the night like a dream turned to ash. Jenny's venom, Gavin's silence, the weight of their choices had broken something in me, but not what I'd expected, not my spirit, not my will. Something else, a chain, a leash, the illusion that my love could buy their loyalty. For the first time, I saw clearly I'd been their bank, their doormat, their ghost, but no more. The doorbell cut through the silence, a harsh demand that pulled me from my thoughts. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Gavin, my son, the boy I'd raised. Now a stranger in a rumpled suit, his face haggard, his eyes bloodshot from a night of champagne or regret. I steeled myself, my cane tapping the floor as I walked to the door, each step a declaration of something new, something unyielding. He stood there, his jaw tight, his hands shoved in his pockets, looking more like a man facing a debt collector than a son visiting his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice sharp, "we need to talk." I nodded, stepping aside, my heart pounding but my face calm. This wasn't the reunion I'd dreamed of, but it was the reckoning I hadn't known I needed. Gavin didn't sit, didn't ask how I was, didn't apologize. He paced, his steps heavy, his voice laced with accusation. "You're sabotaging us," he said, his words cutting like glass. "You walked out, embarrassed Jenny, embarrassed me, and now you're refusing to pay the rest of the bills? You promised, Mom." His tone was the same one he'd used as a teenager, wheedling for a new bike or a trip with friends. But now it was edged with anger, entitlement. I stood my ground, my cane planted firmly, my voice calm, but unyielding. "You chose Jenny's side when she humiliated me," I said, my eyes locked on his. "You stood there, silent, while she accused me of ruining her day, of controlling you, of being jealous. You told me to leave, Gavin. Your wife's day mattered more than your mother. Live with the consequences." His face twisted, a mix of disbelief and rage. "You're being selfish," he spat, his voice loud enough to rattle the teacups on the shelf. "You think you can hold the money over us? You never loved me, Mom, only the power your money gave you. You're jealous of Jenny, of our life because you're stuck here, alone, living in the past." Each word was a dagger, slicing through the memories of bedtime stories, scraped knees bandaged, college tuition paid, his house bought with my savings. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to ask where my son had gone, but I didn't flinch. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the boy I'd raised, but a man who'd chosen a path I couldn't follow. "Go, Gavin," I said, pointing to the door, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. This conversation is over. The door slammed, the echo ringing like a final farewell, the glass of the broken photo crunching under his heel. I stood there, alone, the silence louder than his accusations. His words, selfish, jealous, controlling, hung in the air, each one a wound. But they didn't break me. They burned, yes, but they also clarified like sunlight through a storm. I'd spent decades giving my time, my money, my heart, believing it would keep him close, believing it would make him love me as I loved him. But love isn't a transaction, and I'd been paying a debt he never intended to honor. I sank into a chair, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with a strange, fierce clarity. I was done bending, done breaking, done being their ghost. I turned off my phone, the silence a shield against the world I'd let define me. I picked up a pen, my hand steady for the first time in days, and began to write. Not a letter to Gavin, not an apology, but a list of what I owed myself. Years of putting others first had left me a shadow, but shadows can shift, can grow, can reclaim their light. I wrote until the sun dipped low, until the words filled pages, until I felt the weight lifting. I wasn't just a mother, a widow, a checkbook. I was Eunice, and I had a life to live, a strength to find, a future to claim. Jenny came the next morning, alone, her tears as polished as her wedding gown had been. She stood on my porch, her blonde hair slightly disheveled, her makeup softer, as if curated for sympathy. "Eunice," she said, her voice trembling. "I was nervous yesterday. I drank too much. I shouldn't have said those things." Her eyes were downcast, her hands clasped, but I saw through her act, saw the flicker of irritation when I didn't rush to comfort her. "It's about Gavin," she continued, her voice softening further. "He's upset, embarrassed. We just want to move forward as a family." I listened, my face calm, my heart closed to her performance. Her tears were a costume, her apology a script, and I was no longer her audience. When I didn't respond, her mask slipped, her voice sharpening. "You're being vindictive," she said, her tears gone, her eyes cold. "You're punishing Gavin for one mistake. If you don't pay the rest of the bills, you'll ruin his reputation, our future. And don't think you'll see Keith again. I'll make sure of it." Her threat hung in the air, a final gambit to control me. But I saw her now, saw the woman Keith had warned me about, the one who spun people like tops, who used love as leverage. "Jenny," I said, my voice steady, "Keith is my grandson, not your pawn, and I'm done paying for your dreams. Leave." She stared, stunned, then stormed off, her heels clicking like retreating gunfire. I closed the door, my heart pounding but light, as if I'd shed a weight I hadn't known I carried. A week later, Hilltop Manor sent their attorney, Elizabeth Norris, a stern woman in a gray suit, her folder of bills a weapon of bureaucracy. She sat across from me in their office, the lake visible through the window, its calm a mockery of the storm we'd weathered. "Mrs. Grimshaw," she began, her voice professional but edged with urgency. "The outstanding balance for the wedding is significant. Non-payment could lead to legal action, damage to your son's reputation." I listened, my hands folded, my heart steady. "Miss Norris," I said, my voice calm, "I made no contract with Hilltop Manor. My promise was to my son, a verbal agreement broken when he chose his wife's accusations over his mother's dignity. Gavin and Jenny ordered the services. They enjoyed them. They should pay." Norris warned of lawsuits, of scandal, of costs piling higher with interest. But I wasn't afraid. Her threats were paper, her folder a prop in a play I no longer starred in. Do what you must, I said, rising, my cane tapping the floor. I've given enough. I walked out, the lake's reflection shimmering in my peripheral vision, a mirror to the clarity I felt. That afternoon, I called Mr. Parker, my lawyer since Alfred's death, a quiet man with a sharp mind. Revise my will, I told him, my voice firm. Protect what's mine, my home, my savings, my future. He listened, his questions gentle but precise, and we planned for any fight that might come. I wasn't protecting my money, I was reclaiming my dignity, setting boundaries I should have drawn decades ago. As I stood in my garden, the roses trembling in the breeze, I felt something new, a fire, not of anger, but of purpose. I'd spent my life giving, bending, breaking for others, but now I saw the cost. Not the money, not the savings drained for a wedding that wasn't mine, but the pieces of myself I'd given away, believing they'd buy love, loyalty, family. Gavin's accusations, Jenny's threats, Norris's demands. They were the final storm, clearing the air, leaving me standing taller than I'd ever thought possible. I wasn't done living. I was just beginning, and the world was waiting for me to step into it, unburdened, unafraid, unbroken. 6 months had passed since that night at Hilltop Manor, since the thread tying me to Gavin snapped, leaving me raw but strangely light. Spring had returned to Cumberland, painting the world in colors I hadn't noticed in years. Emerald grass, sapphire skies, roses blooming on my balcony like promises kept. I sold the old Victorian house, its creaking floorboards and heavy memories too much to carry. With the proceeds, I bought this apartment, a sanctuary of light and air, its windows opening to a city park where laughter drifted like music. The weight of the past, Gavin's betrayal, Jenny's venom, the shattered photo on my living room floor, had lifted, not because the pain was gone, but because I'd chosen to set it down. I was no longer just a mother, a widow, a checkbook. I was Eunice, whole and free, standing on the edge of a new dawn. My days took on a rhythm I hadn't known since my nursing years, a purpose born not of duty, but of joy. I enrolled in computer classes at the Cumberland Public Library, a bright space with wide windows and eager learners like me, seniors determined to conquer the digital world. I fumbled at first, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard, but Keith's lessons from years ago echoed in my mind. "You've got this, Grandma," he'd say, his grin infectious. And now I did. I learned to navigate websites, send emails, even edit photos of my roses for my blog. That blog, my little sanctuary of words and blooms, had grown beyond my wildest dreams. What started with a few dozen subscribers, women my age sharing stories of gardens and loss, had swelled to thousands, strangers from across the country leaving comments like, "Your roses give me hope," or "Your words remind me to keep growing." I wasn't just writing about flowers. I was writing about resilience, about finding beauty in broken places, and they saw it, felt it, shared it. I volunteered at the library twice a week, teaching others what I'd learned, how to Skype their grandchildren, order books online, navigate the world that had once seemed so foreign. Their smiles, their small victories, filled my heart in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't just teaching, I was building something, a community, a purpose, a life that was mine. I met Doris there, a widow with a laugh like spring rain, her eyes crinkling with mischief. We started walking together in the park, sharing stories of our husbands, our children, our regrets. She'd lost her daughter to distance, not betrayal, but she understood the ache of a fractured family. Over coffee at a cozy Sunday cafe, we'd talk for hours. our laughter drawing curious glances from younger patrons. "We're not invisible yet," Doris would say, winking, and I'd laugh, feeling seen, feeling alive. The roses on my balcony thrived, their petals a canvas for the life I was painting. I'd wake each morning to check them, pruning with care, watering with love, their colors a reminder that growth comes after storms. My blog became a mirror, reflecting not just my garden, but my heart. Readers sent letters, actual letters, handwritten, arriving in my mailbox like gifts from another era. One woman wrote of losing her son to addiction, finding solace in my words. Another shared how my roses inspired her to plant her own after years of grief. I answered each one, my pen steady, my words honest, and in their stories, I found pieces of my own. I wasn't alone anymore, not in the way I'd been in that old house, surrounded by ghosts. I was part of something larger, a tapestry of voices woven through shared strength. Then came Robert Fleming, a name from my past, a doctor I'd worked with during my nursing days at Cumberland General. He'd retired years ago, his wife lost to cancer, his life quiet like mine. I ran into him at the library, his gray beard and kind eyes unchanged, his smile warm as he recognized me. "Eunice Grimshaw," he said, his voice a gentle surprise. "Still saving the world, one patient at a time?" I laughed, shaking my head, but his words stayed with me, a reminder of who I'd been before I became Gavin's mother, Jenny's pawn. We started meeting for tea at the cafe, then dinner at a small Italian place downtown, its red checkered tablecloths and candlelight a backdrop to our stories. He spoke of his travels, his daughter in Seattle, his love for jazz. I shared my blog, my roses, my journey from that night at Hilltop Manor. He saw me, not the mother, the widow, but me, Eunice, with dreams and stories of my own. One evening, over a glass of wine, Robert told me about his sister's seaside cottage in a small village an hour from Cumberland. A white house overlooking the ocean, its air thick with salt and freedom. "Come with me," he said, his eyes steady, his smile hopeful. "Spend the summer there. Just us, the sea, and time to breathe." I hesitated, my heart racing, the idea both thrilling and terrifying. At 78, was I allowed to say yes to something so bold, so new? But then I thought of Alfred, of his steady voice saying, not with words, but with deeds. And I knew he'd want this for me, this chance to live, to love, to be more than a shadow. "Yes," I said, surprising myself, my voice firm. Robert's smile widened, and in that moment, I felt it. The wings I'd never known I had, lifting me toward a horizon I'd thought closed forever. Keith visited before I left, his face brighter than I'd seen in years, his pride in me a mirror to my own. He helped me pack, arranging books on my shelves, teasing me about my new boyfriend. "You're free, Grandma," he said, his voice warm, his eyes shining. "I've never seen you so alive." I hugged him, my heart full, knowing he was right. Keith was my light, my anchor, the one who'd never wavered, even when his father had. He promised to visit the cottage, to bring his biology textbooks, and tell me about his dreams. As he left, waving from the sidewalk, I felt a peace I hadn't known in decades, a certainty that this new life was mine to shape. As the sun sank into the sea, its light dancing on the waves, I thought of Alfred, of Gavin, of the life I'd left behind. I'd lost a son, not to death, but to choices I couldn't change, and the pain of that would always linger, a quiet ache in the corners of my heart. But I'd found something greater, myself, whole and unburdened, a woman with stories to tell, roses to grow, a life to live. Robert's hand brushed mine, his warmth a quiet promise, And I smiled, feeling the salt air on my skin, the rhythm of the waves like a heartbeat. I whispered to the stars, barely audible over the sea's song, "Thank you, Alfred. You said I was stronger than I thought. I finally believe it." At 78, life wasn't an ending but a beginning, a canvas of possibilities painted with courage, peace, and the freedom to be Eunice, fully and fearlessly.